don't know what we can talk about in this nation without talking about white superiority, honestly.
Who defines the meaning of God also defines the relationship between economy and God.
African Americans spent $1.3 trillion last year, making us the 16th wealthiest nation in the world. Why have we not turned those riches into wealth to develop our community?
In Kemet. So as John Henry Clark said, the Nile is a cultural highway, and the culture and the knowledge flowed from the south to the north. So it flowed out of Ethiopia into Kush, and then from Kush into Kemet. So the Kushites were, in my estimation, Kush was the repository of the knowledge of Kemet. Hence, when Kush fell, Kushite kings came into Kemet, restored the land, and then under the aegis of Shabaka decided that he wasn't going to do what his big brother did. He wasn't going to go back home and rule from Kush. Shabaka decided he was going to stay in Kemet and reestablish his stronghold in Kemet, and then sent his priestly scholars all throughout the country to give him an inventory of all of the temples in Kemet, all of the temples where, at least by that time, 3,000 years of sacred knowledge had been recorded: historical knowledge, scientific knowledge, philosophical knowledge, mathematical knowledge, architectural knowledge was stored within these libraries. And so one of those priests came back to Shabaka to give his report and said that he found this one document, this critically important document, that was worm-eaten, meaning that back in those days, they didn't have Xerox machines, they didn't have printing presses. So young scribes had to sit at the feet of priests, and they manually wrote out these ancient papyruses and made copies of them, hence the art of manuscripting, manually writing. And so they would take ancient texts and then write a new copy of the ancient text. So this one priest reported to Shabaka that this very important document was found worm-eaten, which meant that there was an interruption in this intergenerational transference and maintenance of ancient African spiritual knowledge. So Shabaka then told this priest to rewrite this document, and make it better than it was before. Now, the only way you can take an ancient document that was worm-eaten, riddled with holes, the only way that you can rewrite it and make it better than it was before is if you had an original copy, which they likely did. And so to ensure that this document, this revised document, would not be worm-eaten, what did Shabaka do? He had it written on a block of stone, basalt, which is one of the hardest stones on the planet. And that stone is now in the British Museum. It's known as the Shabaka Stone. And the significance of the Shabaka Stone is that it records the oldest story of Genesis ever written by human beings. An African story about the beginning, about the Neteru, creating the Neter who created the world. So it's taking Genesis back further than you can ever imagine. So this is deep spiritual thought, man. This is deep science. And this is what the Kushites reintroduced into Kemet during the 25th dynasty. And it is what Jan Asman, in his book, The Mind of Egypt, referred to as the first Renaissance in history, the first restoration of ancient African traditions in world history occurred during the 25th dynasty. And what these Africans from Kush did was they reached back into their ancestral memory at least 2,000 years and brought forth some of the most significant texts of the Old Kingdom. Hence, as we have excavated and restored the primary temple of the temple tomb of Karakamen on the west bank of Luxor, Egypt, we have in Karakamen's tomb texts from the Book of the Hours, all 24 hours of the Book of the Hours in the first pillared hall. We have inscribed on the walls texts from over 87 chapters of the Book of Coming Forth by Day in the first pillared hall and the second pillared hall. We have approximately 25 replicated chapters from the Book of Coming Forth, inscribed on the pillars and the pilasters and the walls of this temple tomb of Karakorum. And we also have pyramid texts in this 25th dynasty tomb, pyramid texts that were first inscribed on the walls of the tomb of Unas at Saqqara. We've got that text, which means that either the Kushites had visited these sites, and the person responsible for designing Karakorumm's tomb had access to that knowledge, or they had access to that knowledge which they brought into Kemet from Kush. I'm still not clear about that, but the mere fact that we have the physical evidence in Karakorumm's tomb is something worth investigating. And as we restore the memory of the Kushite presence in Kemet, we are giving life to these ancestors and creating up other opportunities for us to dig down deeper and find more of this information that our ancestors preserved for us, because I feel very strongly that they knew this time was coming. They knew that we would have access to this information, and they waited until the time was right, until the people were in place to allow this information to be excavated and then shared with the world.